Glad you chose to be here this evening. If you'd like to have it outlined, don't already have one, just raise your hand, and one of those men in the back, be sure and get it to you. Well, that's being done. Let me look in the book of Matthew, the 6th chapter. We're looking again at the Sermon on the Mount, and we've gone through chapter 5 and noticed so many things there about the blessed individuals and then various teachings on aspects of our life that affect every one of us and affect those around us. And in chapter 6, beginning here in verse 1, it's going to be teachings on doing alms. And so let's look at this in verses 1 through 4. He says, "Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth. Let thine alms be in secret, and thy Father which is in secret himself shall reward thee openly." You look at that, and whenever you think about alms, one of the most common concepts of it is that of giving financially. But it actually goes beyond that. It's expanded in really what we do, our life and such. The word itself means mercy or pity, especially exhibited in giving of alms, but it can refer to the righteousness that we live, living that soberly, righteously, and godly before all individuals, charitable deeds, kindness that we show to others. All of these things deal with the alms that we're to give. And whenever the song that we sang before was sung, I hope you realize that's the life that we're supposed to have. We've been created in Christ Jesus unto good works, according to the Ephesian writer. And so I look, and my life is such, I want to be a worker. I want to give alms. I want to live this life of righteousness. I want to live this life of mercy and pity. I want to live this life of charitable deeds. I want to be somebody who shows God living in me. And so you look at that, and as Jesus addresses this in verse 1 through 4, he points out the first aspect is don't do it to be seen. Now sometimes people look, and in the Bible they'll see things. In the book of Matthew, the 5th chapter, in verse 16, he says, "Let your light shine before men, that men may see your good works." Well, over in the book of Matthew in chapter 6 here, it talks about don't do it before men. And so sometimes people say, well, there's a contradiction. And let me tell you, one of the aspects of Bible interpretation, if I look and I find two passages, and I look at them and they say, well, this contradicts this. The problem is not that the Bible is contradicting itself. The problem is me, that I'm not looking and studying clearly, because God does not contradict himself. God's truth is not such that it's confusing. The principle in Romans, the 14th chapter, there in the spiritual gifts and such, he says God is not the author of confusion. And yet if the Bible that he gives us contradicts, that's confusing. So if I look and I see something that seems to be a contradiction, I need to back up, look and study more deeply, realizing that I need to make sure that I understand what God is saying, not what I thought right off, but what does he say? And that's the case here. In the book of Matthew, the 5th chapter, he makes it clear that, yeah, you want to be seen. But notice what he points out. He says that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And so there is my life. I'm pointing it towards God. Here in chapter 6, he talks about you don't do it before men to be seen of them. In other words, did you see what I did? And so it's the intention in the work, the heart that it comes from, who I am serving, who I am living for. And so the dilemma is gone whenever we look at the wording of the verse. You can't just take a little part and say, oh, to be seen, not to be seen, contradiction. No. To be seen, to glorify your Father which is in heaven. And in Matthew, the 6th chapter, it's very clean, to be seen of them. There, even in the latter part, he says, otherwise you have no reward. So in other words, you're looking at it, and that's what I want. And so here he says, don't do it to be seen. Now look, some people, they say, well, I don't want anybody to see what I've done. Don't want anybody to know anything I've done. Well, that's an overreaction. What is your intention in doing this? Is it that you're doing these things and pointing people to God, or is it you're trying to point people to self? Well, if you're having that attitude, you need to back up and get away from it, but that doesn't mean that you try to hide your Christian life. God is telling us over and over that we have to be seen. This morning we looked at the roll call of faith in Hebrews 11th chapter. What if Abraham hid everything that he did? Nobody ever saw it. He wouldn't have been much of an example, would he? He wouldn't have been a part of the cloud of witnesses. The same with all of those others. Their lives were manifest, but their intention, their desire, their goal. Remember in the book of Hebrews we talked about, they look for the city. In other words, everything I'm doing, I'm working, I'm doing these things. Why? Because I want to live this godly life, this alms-giving life, but I'm going to go to heaven where God is. I'm living for Him. And so the intention there is very, very plain. It's like worship also. Sometimes we can do acts of worship in order to be seen or just to get them out of the way even. But true worship is to worship God in spirit, that is giving my inner self to Him, and in truth. So I do what He says, but again, my heart, my intent is towards God. And so here it makes plain that we are to not be doing things to be seen. Now you look, and if you do word studies, in Matthew the 6th chapter, if you look at that word where it says to be seen, it's a word that is theathenai. And our word, our English word, theater, comes from it. So don't make yourself a theater. Well, why do people get into theater? You want to. Some people love acting, but they do it because they want to be before an audience. Here he is. I'm the greatest singer. I'm the greatest that. And I want an audience. But he says that's not what you do. It's not the intent of looking to self and having your life as a theater or a performance before others. And so I look, and I'm Matthew 5, letting my light shine, glowing towards God. Matthew 6, don't put on a theatrical performance so everybody will say, whoa, did you see what he did? And glorify yourself. So it's the prideful action of working with the intent of being seen of others and glorifying yourself, putting on a performance for others to glorify me. But then he goes on and he talks about, here's the consequence if we ignore this. If we go on and we live this kind of life. And if you look in the New Testament, you'll find the Pharisees were very, very good at this. Standing on the corners, do you see me? Praying and everything to be heard of men. We'll address that even next week in Matthew 6 and verse 5 and following. But if we look at this, he points out in verse 1 that if you live this life, he says, you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. That's a sad thing. But that's the life. Whenever I think of this, I think of the televangelist. I mean, it's just a natural flow that we have. I mean, they look and they're up there, and they're, so many times it'll be the uniform, the idea of the robes and such they wear, or this, and the glowing speech. They're so concerned with the speech that they give and how they're perceived, because after all, they want money. They want glory. They want to be the biggest televangelist around. Well, these individuals, they better enjoy it, because they're not getting anything from God. That's what he's saying here. This type of attitude is you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Now, if we act to glorify or to secure that glory from men, notice he says you have no reward. In verse 2, he says they have their reward. You go down in verse 5, when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are. They love to pray standing in the synagogues at corners that they may be seen of men. They have their reward. In verse 16, whenever you fast, be not as the hypocrites of sad countenance. They disfigure their faces that they may appear unto men to fast. They have their reward. In other words, if that's what it is, I mentioned this morning, Kenneth Copeland, and I always hate to talk about him because he's from Texas, but that's a bad thing. He is a horrible, horrible man. But his whole thing is lifting up self, being the one that people look to. And it's like, Lana, she'll see people like this, and she says, well, they're not going to like that one day. And the reality is, you look, and this is all you get. And you think about it. In the book of Matthew, the 16th chapter, the Lord addresses this idea of what we do in this life, and that's what we seek. In verse 26 and 27 of Matthew 16, he says, what does a man profit if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? The Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels and reward every man according to his works. So if my works are like we spoke of, to be seen of men, you're going to get a reward and you're not going to like it. It's going to be a horrible thing. In the book of 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 19, these individuals, I'm righteous, I'm holy, I do all these things, and so you see all this. In 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 19, you have it, and even if they looked and they thought, well, God is proud of me right here, if in this life only we have hope, we're of all men most miserable. The reason being, in 1 Corinthians 15, they were saying there wasn't a resurrection. But if you look at the context here, it's miserable because of what will be the reward. The Lord will reward those according to that which we're due, because of what we did, what we sought, what we chose in life. And therefore, you look at it and here some guidelines for a righteous life. In other words, now he talks about, here are some things that can help us. Okay, what am I supposed to do? If almsgiving is not just in money, and even if it's that, I've known people that were very, very proud of what they gave. Do you know how much I give to this church? Haven't seen it here, but whenever I became a Christian, there was a man there. He was very, very proud of what he gave. And it was very clear what he did whenever you saw some of his conniving behind the scenes. But they look, and whether it be that, or whether it be the life we live, involved in the church, working. Yesterday we had a work day and we did a lot of things around here. Well, if everybody looked, says, came in and hold a sign, I was here yesterday and I did this. Well, I want people to know other people showed up. We're thankful for those who did this work. But they didn't come in sounding a trumpet saying, look at me. And so whether it be the works we do, the visitation, involvement in this, leading in worship, teaching Bible class, attendance on a regular basis, whatever it is, you look, and if we do it as a play actor or a hypocrite, we fail. So make sure that what we do, I've said before, individuals will say, well, I don't know. We see individuals who need help, who need encouragement, I just hate to bother anybody. And I'll tell them, that's what Christianity is we bear one another's burdens. We exhort, we comfort. We give liberally and cheerfully so that things can be done, so that the word can go out. That's who we are. But it's because of whose we are. That's what being a Christian is. I belong to Christ, and so I do that. I want my light to shine. I want your light to shine. The writer in the book of Ephesians tells us to mark those who walk so as he for examples. And I'm glad to look. I see people in this congregation through the years that have so encouraged me, because you look and they're present in everything that they can do, whether it be praying, whether it be the worship, the singing and such. you can count on them. If there is a special need, to the best of their ability, they're going to do what they can, whether it be a physical, a spiritual, financial, whatever it is. We have been blessed through the years with so many people like that are amazing examples, and there's nothing hypocritical about them. They don't want to be recognized in the sense that, oh, I did it. But more, let's all be Christians. Let's labor together. Let's do this. And so don't be a play actor in life. Every one of us are alms givers, whether it be the giving on the first day of the week, whether it be the charitable acts that we give to one another, whether it be the righteous life that shines forth around us. Do it for the right purpose. Pray to God that you can be able to accomplish these things to His glory, and then set forth and do it. That's what God's plan is. And then don't be your old and best fan. Notice in chapter 6 and verse 3, when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand is doing. You think about it, and a lot of people think, don't let my left hand know what my right hand is doing. In other words, I'm just looking. One man said it this way: you give with this hand and you're patting yourself on the back with the other, because you're totally involved in this and me. No. You look at some people, they're so lifted up with pride that they just, at night, they may go to sleep. Like that one who, remember the prayer? I thank God I'm not like. And at night, do I lay down and I think, I did this and I did this and I did that. And there's nothing wrong with recounting your life and saying, what was I able to accomplish to the glory of God today? But if I'm sitting there and thinking at the end of the night, man, I am something. Whew, if everybody could be like me, we would be so amazing in this congregation. A lot of people just dwell on themselves. You look, I remember years ago, the coach at the baseball team out in St. Louis, I believe it was Whitey Herzog, if I'm right, and he retired. And somebody asked him, said, why did you retire? And he pointed out that you have these young men who come up. They have accomplished a great deal. I mean, the number of people that play in professional sports is so minuscule. And they get all of this money for it. And he says, you can't tell them anything. Why? They're their biggest fan. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've accomplished? And so they take nothing. God looks, and He wants us to be humble servants in His cause. So I'm not going to dwell on myself. I'm not going to look and make sure that everybody knows what it is, and I'm not going to think about how great I am. In the book of Romans, in the 12th chapter, in verse 3, I remember what that said a moment ago. But, he said, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And so I look and I realize who I am. I've been blessed. I've been blessed to have various abilities. They're not the same as yours. I look and I watch. I've said before, I love the lectureships. I love gospel meetings. I love to have other men in the congregation preach. I love to look and think about all the classes ongoing. We have some amazing teachers. I look and I go down through the halls usually in the mornings, and I'll stand outside the class, just listen a little bit, see what's going on. And I hear some of these ladies over there. It's just amazing the abilities they have in teaching these young ones. I look and I think about the ladies' classes, and I hear Lana talks about how great a job all of these individuals did, how they accomplished this great thing. In the lectures, I listen to these men, and I think, whoo, I wish I could preach like that. But then I look and I think, I use my abilities to the best I can. Am I special? Nope. We're looking for a new preacher. Somebody asked me the last preacher's meeting, they said, what if you hadn't found anybody? I said, well, don't let it out. But actually, if I quit preaching and it's just left up to the men of this congregation to fill this pulpit, that would not be hard. We have so much ability. The same thing with teaching classes and such. So I look and I recognize that I have to consider who I am. And what I do is what I can do. And whenever I do that, I don't dwell on it. I let it become just second nature. You know, why do you people ask me, I remember when I first moved up here, 1982, and we had a work day. And I got on my grubbies and went out. I probably told you this before, and I went out and I had more than one person come up and say, "What are you doing here?" Well, I thought it was a work day. He said, "Well, I thought you was the preacher." And essentially what I said was, I thought I was a member. So, I mean, that's what I do. If I'm a member, I give Ephesians, the 4th chapter, what I can. If I minister, I do it to the best of my ability. If I preach, I do it to the best of my ability. If I do, whatever I do, it ought to be such that every one of us, whenever we do anything, it's just who we are. My righteousness isn't to be seen to glorify me, but it's simply seen to identify me and you. That's who we are. That's what we do. That's how we as Christians live. And so these alms that we do are there. I'm not going to be lifted up. The church in Laodicea, in Revelation, the 13th chapter, he talks about those individuals who thought they had everything. And he said, "You're blind, you're naked." He said, "I wish you knew that." Oh, they had the riches of the world. They'd accomplished a great deal of things in the society in which they lived. But they didn't realize they had nothing, because they were the ones who recognized most of all their greatness. The same thing happened to the church at Corinth, warned about that in 1 Corinthians 4, where they thought so much of themselves. So don't be your best fan. Be your best encourager. You know, I can. Like the Apostle Paul, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. Well, God's given me the ability. What am I going to do? The best I can. Matthew, the 25th chapter, the parable of the talents. I don't care what abilities I have. I'm going to use them to the best I can to the glory of God. But I'm not going to be puffed up because of that. Because, you know, the Lord said, whenever you've done these things, all you've done is that what your duty to do. That's who you are. You were created in Christ Jesus unto good works. And then I need to consider the proper God-given reward. You know, even if I do not have anybody ever recognize what I've done, if you never have anybody come up and say, "You know, Cooper, I'm so glad that you did this. It really helped me to see you get up and lead these songs. It helped me to see you take part in this." If you never get that, God knows. He knows what I've done. I look and I realize that God is going to reward me. In verse 4 there again, he says, "Your Father will reward you openly." I mean, I'm going to stand in that day and I'm going to hear those words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And I'm going to rejoice, because that's what I was living for. That's what I did this for. God knows. John, the 5th chapter, in verse 29, you find the picture there of the resurrection. And in that hour, whenever just and unjust are raised, well, the just are going to be blessed. And he will have, those who have done good, they'll be raised unto the resurrection of life. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. You know, I'm pressing towards that prize, that goal. And I hope that the example that you and I set will encourage others, as we spoke of this morning, to be a part of that. But I'm going to look and I'm going to say, "Yes, God, I know what it is that you're expecting of me. You just expect the best I can do. I'm not going to compare myself to others and say, I do more than him or he does more than..." No. Let's just all do what we can to the glory of God. You know, you look and you find that whenever he does that, whenever he does this, tells us this, he's just looking and saying, remember who you are and whose you are, and act like it. That's really what the Sermon on the Mount, a large part, is. Jesus is looking and saying, you know, you're different. You're different people in this world of self-serving, of ungodliness, of unrighteousness, of darkness. You're the light that shines in the world. You're the one that does the good things, that does alms deeds that are profitable unto the kingdom of heaven and the world in which you're a part of. Do it for the right reason. You've given your heart to God, now give him his life. You look and you think, that's who I am. I've been blessed in so many ways. You have too. The greatest blessing is, I know, as I spoke of this morning, you know, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible is Romans, the 8th chapter, where he talks about, we know that all things are going to work together for good. You know, I've faced struggles in life, not near what people I know of in this congregation have faced. But I can go to them and I can tell them, you know, it's going to be okay. Does it mean it's not going to be hard? No. Hardship comes. But you know, the faith I have, as we spoke of this morning, just permeates in my life and your life. And we live in such a way that we know that God's for us. Who can be against us? Everything is going to be okay. And it may be that I don't really recognize the full fruition of that until I stand before God. And he says, enter in. I've been waiting for you. You ever traveled anywhere? You got a long journey. You're going to visit maybe your grandparents or brother or sister, somebody you loved, and you separated for a while. And you look at that journey and you think, oh, it's taken so long. But you know, whenever you get there, you're going to see that one. I tell people, if I go to the airport, I hate to take people at the airport to see them leave. But I love to go and wait for people to come in on a flight. Because I can just sit there and I'm okay with watching several flights come in. Because you sit there and you see the people line up, and then here comes that plane disembarking, and you see somebody coming down that aisle, and they look, and they see somebody, and maybe it's a little child, and they just go running with Grandma! And they jump up in their arms. The reunion that is there, because you're pressing on. They know that flight was long, that trip was long, but the reward at the end is worth it. And that's what God says. You look, and we don't expect reward in this life, but God says, I know what you do, and I will reward you. And so I'm going to live this proper way, because God has given me the hope, the strength, the faith to go on and live this life of blessing. But this blessing, since I have all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ, Ephesians 1 and verse 3. That means who I'm talking to are those who, they've reached the age of accountability. They know right and wrong. They're able to be held accountable. And they've been baptized into Christ. And you realize right then, every spiritual blessing is now yours. And so you live like it. And so I live my life, I can't help but live for God. Once I recognize that, I can't help but let my alms giving be done with a heart and intent that Paul expresses in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31. Whether you eat, drink, whatever you do all the glory of God. I mean, that's our life in a nutshell right there, because of who we are and whose we are. God made it so, and so we live it so. And that's what Jesus is speaking of about the alms giving. I pray that I may always be surrounded by such a people. Like I said, I've been blessed so many times by being able to look around, and I hope that I've blessed others in that same way of seeing Christianity in action. And that's really what he's talking about. If you haven't made that decision, if you haven't become that one who is in Christ and a partaker of all the spiritual blessings, you have the opportunity to. There's also the danger that I can be enticed by the world. One of the things, the works of the flesh, is the pride of life. And so it's begun to be about me. It's time to turn back. Go back to the one that you surrendered your life unto as you were baptized into his death. Return to that life. And we can help you with it as we stand and sing the song of invitation.